A while ago, we first learned that Pixar was going back to the well and was going to be making a fifth Toy Story movie, and this one probably has the potential to be the most controversial one that they've ever made. On the one hand, you have the Toy Story 4 lovers who think that the fourth film was the perfect ending to the franchise. After the ending of Toy Story 3, where Woody tries to repeat the cycle he had with Andy, but this time just with Bonnie, he comes to the realization that over time he's changed and grown as a toy. He can't go back to what he was before because he's no longer that person. It's not what his heart desires. Thus, when he meets Bo, he realizes that his new purpose is to travel the world as a nomadic toy, try and help others get their happily ever after, find homes for the lost and abandoned toys of the world, give them the joy of having a child like he had, get them their own Andy. I used to be a hater of this ending. I was firmly in the camp of thinking that Toy Story 3 had been the perfect end for the franchise and for the characters, and that by having Woody leave the toys behind and go off on his own, it ruined his character and arc. Then I rewatched Toy Story 4 for the first time since the cinema, just last year, and my whole perspective on this changed. I actually saw what they were going for and it worked really well. Of course, there are a lot of people that don't share that opinion though. The people that continue to hate the film like I used to. Those that view it as a complete bastardization of the ending of Toy Story 3 that retroactively renders it less heartfelt and emotional. Thus, you have a lot of people who liked the ending of 4 who don't want the franchise to continue because they think it was perfect. And then you have the people that dislike Toy Story 4 and its message who want 5 to get the old gang back together like we've seen in the concept art. This of course has led to a whole heap of differing opinions online as to what the plot should entail, which further bleeds into discussion as to what future films should explore, if anything. This is what leads me into the discussion point for today. I saw on Reddit just the other day a post that posed the question: in the course of Toy Story 5, or even in a future film, should the gang of original toys encounter Andy again? This could be in any form, going to live with him again, him visiting Bonnie and seeing his old toys, or even just passing him in the street and they notice him. It was a question that got a lot of discussion, and much of it was at odds with one another. But it did get me thinking, should they ever see Andy again? Or is that a storyline left best in the past? I think I can sort of understand both sides of that argument. After all, Andy has always been a huge part of the story of the toys. When we meet him in the first film, to them he's essentially this great god. He's their whole world, and their greatest desire is to be loved by him and played with. Woody's the favourite toy, and he gets to sleep on the bed with Andy, and then Buzz comes along and seems to replace him because Andy's becoming more interested in space. Thus, Woody begins to compete with Buzz to try to earn the majority of the affection, and by doing so, the two gain a closer understanding of one another and are able to make peace. This in turn allows Woody to become a more well-rounded leader for the toys, because he's no longer jealously guarding his position as the top dog. He realizes that it's more about what Andy wants and needs, and not what he can get from Andy. In Toy Story 2, Andy actually hardly appears, but his presence is felt when Woody feels like he has a responsibility to the rest of the Roundup gang, who never got to have their own happy ending. He feels like he should go to Tokyo and live in the toy museum with the rest of them. Once again, he has to make a choice about where his heart really lies, and what the purpose of his existence is. He decides the purpose of a toy is to be played with, not to gather dust in a museum without the love of a child. That realization and his deep love for Andy is what drives him to escape the clutches of Stinky Pete the Prospector and bring Jessie and Bullseye along for the ride. He figured that the whole purpose of a toy is to be loved by a child, and he stands by that belief in Toy Story 3. Whilst he's still that beloved nostalgia toy that Andy probably keeps on the desk, the others have been completely set aside and are likely facing the reality of being boxed up until he pulls them out for his own kids to play with one day, which means they're going to face down years and years in the attic. Whilst the rest of the toys are therefore excited when they're accidentally donated to Sunnyside Daycare, as they'll have the opportunity to be played with at long last, Woody clings tightly to the idea of pure loyalty to his single child. In his mind, he's Andy's toy and nobody else's, and that's where he belongs. At the end of the film, though, he realizes something, that ultimately, his time with Andy has come to an end. It's a very sweet ending to their long friendship, the acceptance that they both have to move on with their lives. Regardless of what you think of Toy Story 4, the film ultimately holds to the idea that they've all moved on. Woody needs to find a new purpose now that he's no longer Andy's toy. In the end, he goes off on his own with Bo Peep to become a nomad toy who helps other toys find a happy home like he had, where they can be somebody's special friend. However, with Toy Story 5 promising to get the gang back together once more to combat technology or something like that, there is that question: should Andy be involved? Is there room in the story for Andy, even as a cameo? I get why people might like that idea at first, don't get me wrong. After all, nostalgia is a powerful drug that is in demand in this day and age. It's really what is keeping the big animation studios afloat at present. I mean, think about the box office for Pixar over the last half a decade. 2019, Toy Story 4 was a huge billion-dollar gross. It came off the back of years and years worth of big hits, many of which were sequels to older films. Then we come to the more modern era of Pixar, where it's not like they were making money hand over fist at first. A bunch of films went straight to Disney+, which analysts claim somewhat killed their drawing power at the cinema, which led to the dismal flop that was Lightyear that barely managed to make back its original budget and lost a lot of money on advertising. Then Elemental was a success, but it was a far more modest success than the studio had gotten used to over the course of the 2010s, when they were raking in the late hundreds of millions to early billions. What was it that turned those fortunes around? Why, look there, it's Inside Out 2! Yes, 2, a sequel, came out, smashed Pixar's records, became their highest grossing film ever by a considerable margin. It's the exact same thing that happened to sister studio Walt Disney Animated Pictures, where after a big hit in 2019 with Frozen 2 grossing over $1 billion, they had a string of films that were forced straight to Disney Plus and had a limited impact on the box office. Then when they returned to fully theatrical releases, they had 2 back-to-back bombs with Strange World, which didn't even gross $100 million, making it by far the least successful Disney film of the modern era, and then Wish, which was also another practice in humiliation. Then Moana 2 was released, and what do you know, it grossed over $1 billion, and suddenly things are looking up. The takeaway is that nostalgia sells, and what could be more nostalgic than having Andy show up interacting with the toys again? Pixar might think that this is what audiences want, and what's going to sell tickets to Toy Story 5. Although, I think by this point you'd probably simply title the film Toy Story 5, and people are going to come and see it. At this stage, I think it might be the most iconic animated film franchise ever made, or at least it's in that conversation. So when you pose that question, should Andy return, I don't actually think it needs to happen. I don't think it'll make much of a difference to the bottom line of the film if you include him or not. No matter what happens, Toy Story as a franchise is going to do big business, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. You'd probably need to release multiple terrible installments to reach the point of diminishing returns for a franchise of this caliber. But would there be room for him regardless, just for fan service? In Toy Story 5, I'm going to go out on a limb and say no. The reality is that I don't think we're far enough removed from Toy Story 3 in terms of in-universe timeline, or even in the direction the narrative's gone, for that to work in any way, shape, or form. In terms of the in-universe timeline, it's barely been any time at all since he first gave the toys to Bonnie, and since Woody went on the run with Bo. In the concept art that was released for Toy Story 5, you can see the toys are staring intently at Bonnie, who's on her tablet. And she honestly doesn't look much older than she was in Toy Story 4, maybe a year or two if that. Part of me already felt like having Woody come back to see them at that stage was a bit too soon based on the themes that were present in Toy Story 4. But having them see Andy so soon after that huge farewell to childhood ending where he plays with them all one last time and then lets them go? Damn. That would be a terrible thing to follow up on so early. If Andy ever sees those toys again, you gotta go for maximum feels. And I think that would be as a proper adult, maybe with kids of his own. I wouldn't even want him to have a cameo where he's in the background or the toys see him in the distance. It's just much too early to think about that. And to be honest, even if he does make that appearance one day, outside of a very specific context, it should only be in passing. A one and done sort of thing. Under no circumstances should the toys, especially Woody, find themselves going back to Andy. That book has to officially be closed. As we talked about earlier, Woody's entire storyline was consumed by his love for Andy and his need to be in his life for good in some form. That's what drove him, and when he found himself without that bond, he realized it couldn't be replaced. Not for him. He was too different, and so he found a new purpose. If he goes back to Andy anytime soon, it scraps that idea, and instead shifts the narrative to be that Woody couldn't handle being a toy that Bonnie cared about less than the others, and so he preferred to leave rather than suffer that indignity. It doesn't make him seem like the selfless toy going on adventures with his true love to help other toys in need. Instead, it makes it seem like Bo and company are a placeholder for him until something better comes along, which would just wreck everything they've built. I think you kind of have that same vibe with the rest of the toys too. It seems that the theme of Toy Story 5 is going to be about the toys worrying about Bonnie's waning interest in them in the wake of her embracing technology more and more. So obviously, for them to move away from her and leapfrog back to Andy would similarly be a weird move that doesn't feel right, because he's already done that. Lost interest. Their whole desire is to be loved and played with again, and that ain't gonna happen with Andy. I guess you could have them see Andy if he comes to visit and he sees the toys, but even then, in order to avoid that awkward moment, you kind of need Woody to be there too, and yet having such a big moment as Woody and Andy having their reunion, it would just be silly there. It would be massively jumping the shark. Personally, I think that I'd be shocked if they ever see Andy again. I know that people have a lot of nostalgia towards those early days of Toy Story, but the reality is the franchise has passed that era by, and you can't look back. If you do, it's going to lead to character regression. I think that maybe whilst the other toys could one day return to Andy and it could make sense, just not anytime soon, I truly think that if you walk Woody back to any lone child again, it would damage his character quite a lot, and show that ultimately, he never grew past his characterization in Toy Story 1, where he has to be the favourite, otherwise he'll have a breakdown. On top of that, it would require a split of Bo Peep and Woody, which after my rewatch of the fourth film, isn't something I think should ever happen. Seeing them come back together was so beautiful, and let's not forget that Andy didn't exactly want her to begin with. Molly no longer needed her, and instead of giving it away, Andy could have asked for the lamp, which she was a part of, but he doesn't. Thus, even if you have them one day encounter Andy in an antique store or something, with Andy's kid pointing at these old toys and Andy recognizing his Woody, I doubt he'd take the rest of them, which in the end would be a bastardization of Woody's character, abandoning the toys that he loves. It's not going to happen. So I don't think there's really a good answer at this point other than no. Andy's story should be done, and I don't think he should even see them again, let alone take them home as toys once more. I could see maybe the toys are out adventuring and they hear somebody call Andy's name or they hear his voice and they all wistfully look at him from somewhere incognito, but beyond that, it's a no. Leave Andy in the past with his perfect ending during Toy Story 3 and let the characters continue to grow. That's for the best. But then again, these have all just been my opinions and I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of a Toy Story reunion with Andy? Do you think it would work? Or do you think it's something better left in the past? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.